All right. Hello, everyone, again. Welcome and good evening or afternoon, depending on where you're tuning in from. Thank you so much for joining us virtually tonight. My name is Hala Alawi, and on behalf of Atmosphere Press, I am so excited to introduce you to today's event, where we'll be celebrating lyric writing in the form of both poetry and prose. We'll be hearing from Umar Siddiqui reading from Weightless Woven Words, which was released August 14th, from Wayne David Hubbard reading from Death Throes of the Broken Clockwork Universe, which was released on October 8th, and Brett Shapiro reading from Late in the Day, which was released October 21st. All three of these authors' books can be purchased from online retailers and from select bookstores. And of course, you can order the books on Atmosphere Press's website. Just go to atmospherepress.com/books. Please see the links in the chat. Put those here for you. At the end of this event, we will also have time for your questions. So while the authors are reading, if you have a question for any one of them or multiple, you can go ahead and type that in the chat and I'll make sure it gets asked. And then during the actual reading, please keep yourselves muted to help keep extraneous sound at a minimum. But of course, do feel free to use the chat for any praise and comments that you'd like to share. And one last note, we here at Atmosphere Press appreciate your support today and always. If you have a manuscript of your own, we would love to read it, so feel free to submit your work to books@atmospherepress.com. Again, thank you so much for tuning in and supporting Umar, Wayne, and Brett tonight. Let's start off with our first reader, who will be Umar Siddiqui. Umar lives in Riverside, California. He received his BA degree in Media and Cultural Studies from University of California, Riverside, and his MA degree in Mass Communication from California State University, Northridge. He is a voracious Disney fan and fashion aficionado. He also loves writing, reading, alternative music, and working out. Find more at uniquelyumar.com. Tonight, Umar will be reading from Weightless Woven Words, his debut poetry collection. This collection explores themes of mental health and wellness, identity, and the process of healing. Umar's poetry has been called absorbing, complex, and emotionally charged by readers' favorite. And with that, let's hear from Umar himself.
Okay. Thank you, Hala. And first of all, hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. So my poems are on, as Hala said, they're on different themes, and some of them explore my passions. So one of the poems I will be reading tonight will be a Disney themed poem, and I'll have a little disclaimer right before that poem. But let me start. Okay. So my first poem is Aimless Wanderer. So I wonder and wander and wander and wonder. I look at the sky, fearing the ground will split asunder. Then I think of you, but not only you. I smile, but nothing seems true. That smile I was given, validated by my thought that I am deserving, that I am adequate every minute, and everyone tells me things that feel unnerving. I am lost, feeling devoid. I know I can't be grateful, but can't help it. I am a human, so flawed and uncoy. And everyone tells me I realize things that I feel anxious, but my mind is still split. Ambivalent because I don't know what I am looking for. A total wanderer by day, a sleepwalker by night. Looking for what is meant for me and eluding tricks of yore. Am I looking to be held so intimately, so tight? I confess I feel sufficient. I profess my love for all things reminiscent of you, of the others, the haters and the lovers. But I am bothered by the night, under the covers. That smile I was given, validated by my thought that I am deserving, that I am adequate every minute. But I am bothered by the night, under the covers. I am lost, feeling devoid. I know I can't be grateful, but I can't help it. I am human, so flawed and uncoy. I realize things and I feel anxious, but my mind is still split. Meadows for frolicking don't mean much when it's not what I want. For I don't know what to do, but this hunch of my mind makes me ask, what? What do I need to tell you? When I am unlatched to make your story and my story match, do they need to match? Is there a catch? And that's the end of the first poem of the book. And my next poem is called Sinking Ship. And this is basically about feeling like a sinking ship, feeling hopeless and feeling like you're drowning into the depths. But I hoped it would be therapeutic for people to read and not feel alone, like they're the only ones who feel this way. So, doomed like a sinking ship, itinerant and nomadic, lost and losing my grip, I want to break this habit. Lonely doesn't mean empty. Companionship is tempting. My world burns intensely. Angels surround and reassure me. Complicit in the benign ways, asserting gently like a crashing wave. Masking feelings in the periphery, tacitly, aggressively, quietly. Is this how it ends without a notion of making amends? Move on because it isn't worth the mess. Don't tie up the loose knots, but don't think less. Rise above the naysayers, but shall I ignore the aggravation? It festers inside me in layers, engulfing me with irritation. My nature of pacifism makes me vulnerable to your cruel criticism. The capacities of me are innumerable. Is this how it ends? Without a notion of making amends? Move on because it isn't worth the mess. Don't tie up the loose knots, but don't think less. Rise above the naysayers, but shall I ignore the aggravation? It festers inside me in layers, engulfing me with irritation. Extroverted but timid, senseless but human, lacking resiliency but working on sensibility. Is this how it ends? Without a notion of making amends? Move on because it isn't worth the mess. Don't tie up the loose knots, but don't think less. Rise above the naysayers, but shall I ignore the aggravation? It festers inside me in layers, engulfing me with irritation. And this is the Disney theme poem called Good Side. So I took Disney themes, characters, and songs, and I basically, or one song, and I basically rhymed them in a poem. I am your friendly open book, not in your face or vile like Captain Hook, killing them with kindness and providing what suffices, fire and ices and mermaids for my vices. I want to believe, you wish upon a star, that I have no bad side, just a good side, vengeful and greedy at times, sometimes echoing scar. Sometimes I am just carefree on a Hawaiian roller coaster ride. We stay one jump ahead, flaunting Flynn Rider's charming smolder. We say things we later regret, but we cannot keep it till we are older. This is how humans live their lives. We deal with love and we deal with hate. This is now, we must brave the tides. Kerchak came to love Tarzan, which is always worth the wait. I used to be timid like Piglet, or was I ever? I wonder because my current indulgent attitude. Tiana's story makes me never quit. It inspires me to be a go-getter when I see beignets. I am energized with fortitude. Mother Guthel trapped Rapunzel in a tower, but she came to see that her captor was a... We go around the river bend and listen as Grandmother Willow gently advises us some things to follow. And this poem is called Silhouettes of the Social Hour. And it reflects our current thinking and trends, but it's what inspired me to write it was my interest and expertise in fashion. So, and here it goes. Silhouettes of the social hour. The silhouettes, the shapes and the sizes, images of the hour, costumes and disguises, bespoke and frank, tales of style devour, but they do not eat up the scenery. The actor and the actress still do as they do, both in character, both humans, not machinery. They hit the screen with audiences, many or few. The sounds of yesterday resound yet still today. And the look of punk and mod can return and make you nod. Industry and capitals. The world is a marketplace, a space of thinking animals, the globality of the perfect days. A reflection occurs, not only in mirrors, dashing or stunning, A man or a woman, no shunning. The sounds of yesterday resound yet still today, and the look of punk and mod can return and make you nod. Industry and capitals. The world is a marketplace, a space of thinking animals, the globality of perfect days. The best time to rephrase. Oh, but there are so many ways. There are so many mediums that exist in which we can say and we can twist. Are we dressed in silhouettes so quietly? We choose to be dictated and assimilated into the look that is reigning in societies. It might be vile, but it might be sweet. The next poem I'll be reading from is called Afraid of Heights, which is basically self-explanatory, the phobias we have and confronting them. Are you ready to take a leap of faith, to trust the one you never did and maybe never will? Is it too late not to worry, to consider all the possibilities? I am afraid to love you. I am afraid of heights. What will the world say? And I tell myself I don't care. But it matters, in manners unspoken. I was always apprehensive and anxious at the mention of needles. I know some people are endlessly amused by injecting substances into their bodies. I will be afraid of myself simply because of uncertainty. I want to be exemplary, and I feel scared of that expectation and what it embodies. I am usually quite inquisitive with widespread questions, like how far can I run away? How far can I run away to leave myself? But I also fear losing myself in any dimension. I fear the preconceived notions of feeling dejected, feeling forlorn. I love myself a lot of the time, so there are overwhelmingly conflicted, distorted states of mind, of physicality, of emotions that dictate my moods and tones, and that don't materialize but are strangely solid. I want to have that self-efficacy be permanent and omnipresent. For that, I should act and not wait. Self-talk can be toxic, and I know I need to be a sentry, not wanton or stolid. My pursuits of a satisfactory and visioned future hang in the balance. Oh, it's dreadful to even bring it up, inducing more of that anxiety. I treat the past with more care than it deserves, the present with foresight, and the future with forced nonchalance. The best way to go is to proceed with my sometimes inane, but always benign piety. And so the next poem I read is going to be called Proud. And it basically speaks to people that, think highly of themselves and in a way that it doesn't work for them. So proud. You know how you're one of a kind? Well, you're not really the only one, and it's echoing very trite. Don't let it get to your head too much, for cockiness and confidence conflict and don't mix. Assuredly, you're proud, avowed by the crowd, but are running a bit too far to deal with your own scars. Is your pride obstructionist? Is your stride perfectionist? Is your approach to life hedonistic? Or are you eschewing gradually of the decadent? All these questions make you think I'm inquisitive. They should echo my tendency to be intuitive. This terrain has become chaotic and unnavigable because your ego is growing and becoming unmanageable. You're also convinced and not at all dissuaded from the lies you tell yourself, so fabricated. You feel like you're the one I can't permeate, or no one for that matter, a pride no one can penetrate. Assuredly, you're proud, avowed by the crowd, but are running a bit too far to deal with all of your own scars. Is your pride obstructionist? Is your stride perfectionist? Is your approach to life hedonistic? Or are you eschewing gradually of the decadent? You're fearless, but you're insecure, a paradox that irks you for sure. You do not even know how the world will proceed, but indeed it will. It is predestined to be. Okay, and then I'm gonna read Roads We Chose. This is a song about unnameable things. This is a record of my past and present, of how I traveled to you and you traveled to me, and all of our meetings with each other, the letters we sent. We took roads they didn't advise us to take. We braved the heat and the breaking waves. We waited for the cooler weather and raked the autumn leaves. On the way to a promised land, one that had us peeved. Never would I speak of the incidents that even surprised us when we enacted them, role-playing the regrets in the decadence of climates and vibes that made us feel tense. Are we misnomers then, looking for questions unanswered, when we tried to be total, our parts in harmony? An answer that is constructive has to be decisive. So help me here, for I am a lost soul, like a baby. Roads are the avenues, the boulevards, the streets, menacing because of vile mistakes and uncertainties. But do not be afraid to embark on the constructions of man, for the roads are open and collectively feed your wingspan. They may crumble at the seams, so hurry on before they wean. And every morning that you wake, there's no road for you to take. Made by man, they may be flawed or not. Perfection is not something to strive for, but can the road get you closer to it as you trot? Give it meticulous thought and answer me. Okay, and I'm going to read short and sweet. I say, are you thinking what I'm thinking? You're triggered and say no. Hey, great minds think alike. That's how the story goes. You shiver without motion. You stutter flatly in this commotion. I just want this to be subtle. I want for you to preserve your rebuttals. Keep it succinct. I tell you the bottom line, that you're an unsung hero, but you're not my lifeline. I keep it targeted. I keep it didactic, short and sweet and fervid. I want to maintain this dialectic. A friend like you lasts a long time. Lively and healthy conversations remind me I have to go on an errand that's not mine. I'll keep you intact so undoubtedly and resolutely. Short, sweet cliche. Equivocated man is doomed. Present and involved. This planet gave you everything you callously used. The errand is life, the journey, the strife. I depend on you, but also don't. The destination is uncharted and so unknown. Let's part and meet again when linearity permits itself to broaden. Its segmented horizons that are captured by pen. Never give up focus or feel downtrodden. The world will know your name, even if not the universe. Your world knows your aim. The narrow-minded will meet demise, for they cannot survive. They will be surprised. How am I doing on time?
That's great, actually, and
Yeah, okay.
I feel like that was a really good one to finish
Uh-huh.
off on, actually,
Okay,
especially
yeah,
the idea of short and sweet.
yeah.
And I just wanted to say, Umar, I noticed this especially with the second poem you read, but like with the layers built into the lines and the stanzas, it felt like I was having like a physical reaction and physically feeling what you were communicating. So I
Thank
love
you.
those physical senses that you evoke.
Thank you. Thank you. That means a
Yeah,
lot. Thank you.
yeah, of course.
Thank you.
So again, thank you so much, Umar.
Thank you.
Of course. Our second reader for the night is going to be Wayne David Hubbard. Wayne is the author of Mobius, Meditations on Home, and his poems and essays have appeared in Button Poetry, The Good Men Project, and various literary journals. Born and raised in New Jersey, he now lives in Virginia and works in aviation. Learn more at waynedavidhubbard.com. Tonight, Wayne will be reading from Death Throes of the Broken Clockwork Universe, which is his debut poetry collection. In this collection, Wayne blends the quantitative and the qualitative, and in a recent interview, Wayne discussed how astronomy is an endless source of fascination for him, which I have to say I wholeheartedly agree with myself. And so I'm really excited to hear more from Wayne now. So Wayne, take it away.
Thank you so much, Hayla, and good evening, afternoon, morning, everyone. My name is Wayne David Hubbard, and yes, I'll be reading from my new collection of poetry called Death Throes of the Broken Clockwork Universe. It was written over a 10-year period, probably not intentionally, I think. I began writing poetry, not realizing that what I was writing as poetry, as writing was always a way of making sense of the world around me. And perhaps concurrently, I did a lot of reading in science. And so over the years, these poems just kind of congealed and And about 2 years ago, I realized I had a collection on my hands. So with a lot of help and guidance and support from friends and others, I was able to get this book out into the world. So many of the poems that I have in this collection are quite short, and they don't take very long to read. However, there's a lot layered in. In some poems, I'll talk through each line in itself as probably a short story. And we'll jump in and see what we get into. The first poem that I will read is called Matrices. And afterwards, I'll explain a little bit about what went on in this poem. Matrices. I dreamt you returned all of my letters. That night, a moon slid so close to the horizon, I thought we might walk across it. An array is an ordered arrangement of elements, very unlike my memories of you. So few, I admit, I multiplied us. The next night, a dream unfolded in linear equations, but the numerals vanished when I tried to solve. All that remained were variables. At daybreak, one of us woke up whole. This poem was written over a series of years, and certain images came about in some unexpected ways. The image of the moon sliding close to the horizon came from an actual drive through a mountain valley about this time of year, and it felt like the moon was the size of my windshield. The dream of linear equations and the vanishing numerals was an actual dream that I had back in 2012. Where that came from, I don't know. But the framework of the poem didn't come until 2019 when I was actually learning linear algebra because I was trying to prepare for an engineering fellowship. And so all these different images, memories kind of blend together. And that process is sort of kind of how most of my poetry comes together. The next poem that I will read is one of my favorites in the collection. This one's called The Rebellion of Sisyphus. Sisyphus is the Greek hero who was condemned to push a rock uphill for eternity. And this poem, or actually this Sisyphus, always gave me a lot of inspiration, but also it haunted me ever since I was a kid. I thought it was vastly unfair that Sisyphus, who was just trying to, be immortal, would be punished so severely. So I guess in this poem, I resolved it as best I could. This one's called The Rebellion of Sisyphus. At first, the stones would not speak to me. On my last push, they wept that I would stay. Only those who chain death can guess how I reached the other side. The next poem I'll read is called Proof of Life, number 3. This is a poem dedicated to the year of 2020, and it was written on January 2nd, 2021. After the clamor year of proclamation and debate, of giving until it hurts and hurts, profligacy, forgiveness, sobriety, miles flown under night. I prep myself for silence with knife and fork. No decision must be made about bread. Spring, summer, fall, winter, spring. Speak for the self through a rose bush. The next poem that I read, the next few will be love poems, and more about the collection. They're divided into two parts. The first part is a study of time, and the second part is a study of love. Time and love are two very difficult subjects to write about, and yet they are also very fascinating to me. And perhaps poetry is the closest that I can come to in any coherent fashion. Of course, one takes great risk when trying to write love poetry, but one poem really set the course in the direction of all of this, and that was a poem called Love Poem for Sappho. Sappho is well, I'm in love with Sappho, we can just say it bluntly. I wrote this poem one night when I was thinking about her line when she said, I tell you, in another lifetime, someone will remember us. And I remember deep one night, I was thinking, if I could say something to Sappho, what would it be? And I wrote this poem, Love Poem for Sappho. When they ask what it was like, we will say, we lived in a lighthouse with 19 million windows and danced for the sea without a face. The gods will never believe we fooled them into venerating us. A few other short lyric poems are a series called the Arias. Aria like the opera, solo singing. And I always thought that these poems could probably be read out loud, silently, or perhaps put to music. Haven't tried that yet, but in this collection, there are 11 total, and I'll just read a few of them. And then the last poem I'll read is a poem that I wrote to myself. I'll read now aria number 4. You dream life into truth. Imagine me, electric, in universe, parallel. For you, my equal, appearing anew, I hold in my attitude the favor of nations. I consume dark matter and roar stars. Aria number 7. What need have we of new days? We, derelicts of now. What can tomorrow do for us? Bite this fruit. Embrace, no matter the cost, my name as it leaves your lung. Most sweet bitter wound, this tongue. Aria number 8. Light stars made up of what else but us? Would I say I have found? Except I was found by you. Aria number 11. But if I say I desire your freedom, have I not made a boundary of you? The answer to life is yes. And now, the questions. And my last poem is entitled Notes to a Young Poet. I think this was another one that took a long time to write, except I was maybe imagining myself 10 years ago, and maybe this is the advice I would have given to myself had I known then what I know now. So Notes to a Young Poet. You are a kernel of an unrepeatable expression in the history of a world. Follow the dark star. Between being awake and dreaming you are awake, the diamonds are hidden. Love will break you up through that concrete, leave you askance, yet priceless. You are not fine wine. You are not brass nor wood. What you are, money cannot buy. Hide the center. Give the rest away. Be mindful of this. Only the living are dying. If they howl to scrape your bones, howl with them. Go forward now, no matter how you arrive, awaiting in vain that tepid rapture. Interpretation is half the beauty. The other half is you. Thank you.
Oh, what a fantastic line to end off on. And thank you for those anecdotes and thoughts in between the poems. I feel like that added an extra dimension that we might not have seen without that commentary, as it were. So just fantastic. Thank you, Wayne. And we'll be closing out our reading tonight with Brett Shapiro. Brett is an American writer and the author of Those Around Him, a novel published in 2019. His best-selling memoir, L'Intruso, was published in Italy, where he lived for 25 years and later became an award-winning film and theatrical production. He is the author of 2 children's books, one of which was the recipient of Austria's National Book Award. His short stories have been performed in theaters throughout Italy, and he is a veteran writer for the United Nations. He currently lives by the beach in Florida, which you'll see a representation in his background. Late in the Day is Brett's latest work and is a stunning literary fiction novel that has received accolades from various outlets. Kirkus called it a ruminative and moving exploration of friendship and death. I believe its greatest strength, personally, is in its characters, whom you'll hear from in a second. So, without further ado, the virtual stage is yours, Brett.
Thank you so much, Hayla, and thanks to all of you for joining this very special event. I'm really touched by it. Yes, we're going to move into prose, so you're going to have to adjust your tuning mechanisms here, going from poetry to prose. What I decided to do, I had some difficulty because I didn't want to spend a lot of time giving context so you would understand what I was reading. So I decided to take excerpts from, excuse me, each of the first 3 chapters, because each chapter introduces a character. And I hope that by that choice, you get a bit of an understanding of the 3 main characters, and also a sense of the kind of prose that I use and the kind of mood and rhythm that I'm trying to establish in my writing. So we will start. Chapter 1. Hank Bauer looked at his rotary watch, 45 seconds and time to check the pizza. He was hopeful that this time the cheese would be bubbling but not yet brown, and laced with rivulets of orange drippings that oozed from the discs of pepperoni. What he wasn't sure about, however, was the crust. Tricky business, that. He wanted its edges to bubble, and as they cooled, to form crispy air pockets. Marilyn, his wife, used yeast to produce that effect, but he couldn't remember whether it was a special kind or a special brand or both. She was full of such expertise, which always struck him as being the exclusive privilege of her domain, the house and the 2 children, just as he had his expertise in providing for them away from the house for 8 hours a day, each day at the aerospace company. She didn't know a stitch about thermodynamics, and he was clueless about bubbling pizza, though. He was trying. Where was she when he needed her? He switched on the oven light and bent over, pushing his red and white checkered apron to the side so that it didn't block the view inside the oven window. I'll perfect the crust one day, he thought, as he blotted the surface of the pizza with 3 layers of paper towel to remove the excess grease. How he missed Marilyn, even after 3 years. Marilyn was the first and only woman he'd kissed, embraced, explored, penetrated. And now he felt lonely, desolate at times. Still, at 73 years old, that could wait. Herman after marks the beginning. At times, he missed the anchor of her sense as well up. Moments like so tough, resigning himself to the fact that bubbles.
Brett, before you go on, your audio got a little warbled, so I just want to check, see maybe if your mic got knocked aside or something.
I don't think so. It might be my connection which is a little bit shaky at times.
You sound much better now, so it might just be the angle, so feel
It
free
could
to
be.
continue. Just
All
wanted to check.
No, well, thank you, and let me know if that happens again.
Sure.
Okay, at times he missed the anchor of her so terribly that it made his eyes well up, even in moments like this one, placing the pizza on the stovetop to cool, resigning himself to the fact that the edges of the crust would once again not have bubbles, and asking himself what Marilyn's secret was. He grabbed his fishing rod from the garage and left the house through the front door. Walking down his driveway, he thought about catching a pompano, about Marilyn and their 2 sons, and about Jesus. But when he arrived at the beach, he could tell that it wasn't a good day for fishing. A thick layer of brown seaweed was floating along a band of ocean closest to where it breaks on the sand. There wasn't a fisher in sight. He left his gear at the beach entrance and walked along the shoreline. "Good morning!" He turned to his right. A middle-aged woman waved to him, fancy camera strung over her shoulder, long gray hair let loose to ride the breeze. Behind her and the dunes was a house that had been uninhabited and in disrepair since he didn't remember when, a long time. He ventured a smile, but one that was too tentative for her to be able to notice from a distance. Then he waved back to her and continued on his way. Excerpt from chapter 2. It's character number 2, Seth. Seth Ehrlich lifted his head from the 2 pillows underneath it, cracked open one eye, and peered at the illuminated digital clock on the night table. 4:59 in the morning. Just enough time to reach over and flick the alarm button off before the soft but persistent buzzing began at 5. Although he always set his alarm, he couldn't remember when, if ever, it had gone off to wake him up. And this fact continued to please him. It suggested an enthusiasm for another day, empty or full as it might end up being, and a genuine desire to watch the natural world slowly awaken before the hubbub of human enterprise set in and broke the spell. He reached over in the dark to feel his way to the alarm button and switch it off, and saw in the darkness the outlines of the large lithograph of Manhattan he'd mounted on the wall. How did I end up in Florida, he thought. Winston slowly rose from his side of the bed as soon as Seth reached for the clock. He jumped off, tail wagging. Seth rose too and peeled off his pajama top, having abandoned pajama bottoms in his 20s. As he was smoothing out the top of the top sheet with his right hand, he felt a damp blotch on the fitted sheet and remembered that he'd had sex a few hours ago, of the type that he considered the ideal encounter, quick, to the point, uncomplicated by conversation. He didn't know the man's name, didn't really care. At the age of 63, it didn't happen often. Most of the men on the hookup site were either rent boys or closeted married men who satisfied themselves with a hot chat and a fantasy. It also didn't happen often, he knew, because he was 63, hardly the first-tier object of desire. But it did happen enough to make him feel that he was still at play, although he also felt that the supply would soon be running low and then out. More often than not, when he closed the screen door after saying goodbye to an encounter and watched him walk down the driveway to get into his car, his thoughts turned to Yoni, his partner of 25 years, and the reason he stayed on in Israel for the first 20 of them before they moved to New York, where the relationship began to fray. Moments of thinking about Yoni happened less and less as each day went by. There were even strings of days when he realized that he hadn't thought about Yoni at all. and came to understand with relief and with sadness that yet another intensity in his life, one of the longest of them, was losing its bumps and ridges. But at 63, how many bumps and ridges did he want to have? His dog and his sporadic sexual encounters carried Seth through the demands and the tedium of the day by day. He didn't miss Yoni, but he missed the habit of Yoni and their proudly unremarkable ability to carry on like any couple that carries on long enough to enable their disturbances, private and relational, petty and otherwise, to take root and push through above and below the surface. He wanted to carry on with Yoni, he did, but his desire to not carry on became greater, and in the end it won. He resigned himself to this victory with a sense of defeat and doubt. Should I have tried harder? And what exactly should I have tried harder at? Winston was circling by the door. Let's go to the beach. Winston lowered his head to accept the harness around his neck, as if it were some medallion being bestowed upon him for noble deeds. Seth considered many times shaving off his goatee and mustache. Part of him thought that removing all the white from his face would make him look younger, but he also thought that the trim facial hair made him look rugged and sexy. As they walked to the beach at this hour, the streets were dark and deserted. No one was there to share with him the slow creep of loneliness that spread like a mild ache. Loneliness, like his Jewishness, was always there. While neither ruled over him, they accompanied him everywhere, like his blue eyes and his long lashes. He grappled with his loneliness from time to time, like when he had casual sex and felt guilty afterward. And also with his Jewishness, like when as a child he begged his mother to buy those cupcakes with the blue icing, and she scoffed at him saying, "Feh, goyische Dreck," while he marveled at their brilliant colors and felt that his mother and the Jewishness in his life were unfair. But they were facts of his being, and he learned to use them to his advantage. His loneliness carved pathways to thoughts and things that he felt were important. His Jewishness made him feel special, privileged, and, dare he say, among the chosen. When his feet touched upon the sand, he unhooked Winston's leash, removed his flip-flops, and tucked them into the deep side pockets of his 29-inch waist cargo shorts. The dog dashed off in a frenzied tail-wagging dervish toward the thin band of seaweed bordering the shoreline and started sniffing and clawing at the small puncture holes made in the sand by the crabs. The sky was beginning to lighten, and Seth saw a few cumulus clouds at the point on the horizon where the sun would poke out at any moment. From the look of things, the right kinds of cloud formations in the right positions above the seascape, there would soon be an explosion of pinks and oranges and yellows overhead. The woman with the camera was there as well, in the distance, in front of the abandoned house. How lovely it would be if someone bought it and fixed it up, he thought, as he watched the woman feel her way through her large army green case strapped over her shoulder to extract the proper lens without needing to shift her gaze from the evolving tableau in front of and above her. Here was someone who knew what she was doing. One day, Seth thought, I'll approach her, say hi, see what happens. Not today, though. And if you can bear it, one more chapter about Honey. Honey Kavanaugh grabbed her keychain off the foyer table, and the camera strap looped around the hook above it. Underneath the table near the floor molding was a nightlight, the only illumination in the house at an hour like this. She convinced Glenn to put one there, to guide her through the waning of the night and the dawn of a new day. How nice it would be if Glenn came with her once, she thought, as she crossed the threshold and closed the front door behind her, pausing to hear the clicking sound of the latch to signal that the door wasn't ajar. If he came with her just once, they could stroll along the beach and watch the sun come up together. Maybe one of them would go so far as to extend a hand to clasp the hand of the other as they went about being together in the way that they joined hand everywhere in the first years of their marriage. She longed to hold his hand again. It would be dry and scaly, and she'd have to ignore the calluses where his plumped fingers met his palm. Even so, she thought, the interlacing of their fingers might rekindle an intimacy and passion that once seemed inextinguishable. Such a long time ago that was. About the time when Glenn's snoring became so disruptive, they agreed to sleep in separate bedrooms every other day, then during the entire work week, and then always. That's how the glue of intimacy dries up, she thought, as she stood on the front porch. When was the last time they held hands? She couldn't recall. And kissed? Bah! After 40 years of marriage and more than 30 of raising children, the most he could muster was the occasional peck on her cheek or forehead when they found themselves bumping into each other in the house as they went about their business. She felt slighted by those pecks. They required so little of him and satisfied even less in her. That's it? She asked herself each time his mouth poked against her cheek or forehead like a chicken scavenging for seeds. And she understood once again that these kisses of hers weren't intended to arouse her carnal desires and draw them into each other, but simply to placate her so that they could maintain their distance. In the days when she and her husband shared the bed, he turned away from her after the sex was over, or when he wasn't in the mood for sex. The turning created a slender strip of space between them. He felt so far away, and she had trouble falling asleep, undecided between inching her way toward him or lying there waiting for him to turn around and touch her, if only for an instant. When he gained all that weight, his body had an unpleasant smell at night, metallic and gamey. Still, she wished that he would shift over to her from time to time, if only to let her know that he wanted her, but he didn't. When they started sleeping apart because of Glenn's snoring, he bought her a camera, a Polaroid Instamatic. "Happy birthday," he said. He intercepted as she reached into the box and worked the camera out from the lavender-colored tissue. He held it up to his face. "Hold still," he told her. He focused long and hard on her. She wasn't used to it. He repositioned the camera at different angles and clicked away as he fixed on her through the lens. He continued in this way for what seemed to her like a delicious eternity. "There you go," he said as he handed the camera to her. "See how easy it is?" He gave her a peck on the cheek. The next morning, she took the camera to the film developing department of the pharmacy down the street. The film counter was at the end of the pain relief aisle. She placed her camera on the counter. "How long will it take?" she asked the clerk. He opened the back of the camera and looked at her quizzically. "I'd say about forever, and maybe then some." "What do you mean?" He picked up the open camera and turned its back toward her. "Ma'am, there's no film inside."
What a point to leave us off on. Thank you so much, Brett. I've heard from you a few times about how you want every action your characters do to reveal something about them, and you really do achieve that so elegantly. I'm really still thinking about that pizza and all the actions of the pizza. So
Well,
thank
you.
you again. Yeah,
Thank
of
you.
course. So we have about 10 minutes for our audience Q&A. So everyone in the audience, and even each of you authors, if you have a question for one or more of our authors tonight, just type it in the chat and I'll make sure it gets asked. I'll give it a few moments for people to be typing away, but I have a question for you three to start us off. I know you all come to writing these books from various sorts of writing backgrounds. Umar and Wayne, I think maybe you didn't necessarily study or major in writing poetry, or Brett, you've written in various other genres before writing novels. So I'd love to hear from each of you, what led you to writing this book in particular, or this project?
Okay, so I'll go first since I read first. I remember writing poetry since a really young age. I had a second grade teacher who always complimented me on my vocabulary, and she was really impressed with the way I would always not use words, but she was just impressed with of my level of vocabulary. So she encouraged me to keep writing, and she's really the driving force behind this, because if she hadn't said that to me, then I wouldn't have kept writing, setting time aside to write. So I think that all my poems, they do have an aim, and I actually I'm really open about this. I suffer from schizophrenic bipolar disorder. So I wanted my poems to speak to that. And so so then I looked at the poem. I have a lot of like poems in a folder I think it's titled lyrics. So I have a bunch of poems on my computer, and I thought, you know, what poems would fit under the certain categories that I want to go for. And I didn't want the categories to be like, you know, common categories that poets use. I wanted them to be, so some of them one of them is called desperation, one is called perception, and one is called voices/advocacy. So these are not emotions, these are more like just topics. And they're umbrella categories for poems that just basically speak to the human psyche. And I just knew these poems that I selected already spoke to the human psyche, because I feel like poetry just has that element inherently in it. And I was able to, you know, it was really easy for me to just channel and cohere with all these poems.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah, totally.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Yeah, for me, poetry, I always feel like I came in through the side door. It wasn't on my to-do list. I was trying to write fiction and other things, but writing itself was my voice for many years. I was never really a talkative person, and even today, I'm not that much. But I was embarrassed about writing poetry or being caught reading poetry for many years, until a librarian busted me one day and subtly signaled to me that it was okay, and and I wasn't going to, you know, life was going to go on, right? Um, so then I started to get confidence to read more poetry. There was a movie that came out 6 years ago or so called Patterson, and it's about a guy who. Okay, so you guys have heard of this one. A guy who drives a bus, and he has this book and he writes poems every day. And a friend had said, "You need to see this movie, it reminds me of you." And I loved it instantly. It's one of my all-time favorites. And I think that's another thing that gave me more confidence. You know, for a long time, I just wouldn't show anybody anything, but I just had to keep doing it. And the pandemic was a big part of actual publishing, and definitely poetry, art, all these things were my survival mechanism through those trying times. But now it's a lot easier to write, be open about writing, sharing things, and I'm really enjoying this side of poetry.
Yeah, definitely. I think that pandemic side of things is really relatable for a lot of writers. What about you, Brett?
I think the idea of writing novels terrified me for many years, and I don't think that's an unusual feeling. It just seems to be
Definitely.
too large, too overpowering. But with this particular novel, I think what happened was, as I get older and moved back to the States after living abroad for such a long time, I just found that a lot of my histories were being loosened up, and the connections were being loosened up, and that was making me very nervous, because all of my friends and family are so dispersed. It's hard to keep that history tight and meaningful and rich on a daily basis. But at the same time, I'd moved to a place where I didn't know anybody, and I thought, well, how am I going to, is it possible to establish those kinds of connections at such a late stage in life? And that was a very pressing concern of mine. And I thought, well, let's invent a story about that then. Let's create a story in which that is the main theme and see how it plays out. And I decided it was worth pursuing, and I played around with some characters. And once the characters became solid enough that they could kind of guide me on their own as to what needs to be done, it was kind of smooth sailing.
All right, yeah, definitely something to think about for those who are struggling maybe with ideas of what's not just pull from what you're feeling and what you're experiencing. We have a question for Umar from Annie. Listening to your poems, it felt like you were speaking to someone. Is that true, or were you speaking to the universe?
Okay, so first of all, thank you, Annie. That's a really, really good question. I love that question. So because I anticipated someone would ask me this question, because my poems, I want them to be like a conversation, and sometimes it's even with myself. So the way I would answer that question, I'm sorry, this is a terrible answer, just because it's like kind of a gray area, but I would say a little bit of both, just because I would say, but then I would say, because some poems I'm kind of reflecting upon myself. So I am speaking to myself in a way, but then I want the universe to resonate and relate with my words. I essentially want my words to resound with my readers, right? So there's that, and then there's just I wanted to write. It's like my writing is the process of my writing is me making sense of the world and my upbringing and everything, because so I was brought up Muslim, and I'm a religious Muslim still, but I'm really like liberal. My parents are not, so it's like, and I still live with them. It's like they want their views and their mindset to trickle down to me, but they're realizing slowly that it kind of hasn't, or it's kind of changed, and it bothers them. But I have to channel that through my poetry. So so I want to use that example to illustrate that it's me speaking a lot of speaking to, but then also speaking to the universe. So if they have the same experience, they can resonate with that and channel that. And then there's just like some fun poems. Like there's actually 2 Disney themed poems in the book, and basically, so those were just for not just for me, but you know what, like those were for me to channel my fun side, and Silhouettes of the Social Hour, which I read, was my I think I said it before I read the poem. It was more of my fashion poem, because I did talk and styles. So it's just a way for me to just be like loose, and be candid and just write. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like a question with the gray area answer is always the most interesting, so I love
Yeah.
that.
Right.
We've got 2 more questions that we'll close out with here. First, one to Wayne from Annie, and I love this question. Wayne, your poems were full of wonder and searching. Do those words describe you as a person?
Thank you, Andy, for the question. And my answer is absolutely. Those words do describe me. I think I've always been that way, and I haven't been able to turn it off, for better and worse, But yeah, I'm, as you probably already guessed, a huge reader. I've always been asking questions, big and small, as long as I can remember. And I think the writing and the poetry is an expression of that. So maybe just externalizing that in more of a form. And it's a very exciting way to live. Not always easy, but I'm really grateful just for that experience of being alive, and every day is an adventure to me. And that is not a cliche. I really do believe that.
Wonderful. Yeah, wonder and searching. They make a great poet, I would think. And then finally, Brett, to close us out, a question from Wayne. I enjoy the different countries that your characters journey through and relate with. Do you have a favorite setting for your stories?
That's an interesting question. I have a lot of people who tell me, because I've done extensive amount of traveling for the UN and lived in many places, and so many people are always saying, oh, you should, why don't you have your next book or your story take place here or there? And they always tend to take place in really quiet, very typical settings that have nothing special about them, because I think I'm more interested in the ordinary things that trigger the extraordinary thoughts, rather than the extraordinary places that distract us from some of the thoughts that are buried deep inside of us that need to come out. So the simpler the setting, the more at home I feel when I'm trying to create a home for my stories and novels.
Yeah, I love that story first, right? Well, thank you all again so much. It was so great to hear all three of your words, poetry and prose, in the voices of their creators. So thank you so much to Umar, to Wayne, and to Brett for just being with us here today and sharing not only your stories, but also, these internal thoughts. And thank you to everyone in the audience who made it out with us tonight, slash this afternoon, slash this morning, wherever you are, to celebrate these wonderful authors. And don't forget, of course, that you can order Weightless Woven Words, Death Throes of the Broken Clockwork Universe, and Late in the Day. I almost said those around him. Late in the Day, from the links in the chat. And of course, please also consider checking out atmospherepress.com to browse our new and forthcoming releases, to sign up for our email newsletters so you can hear about future events as well, or to submit a book manuscript of your own. You can always feel free to submit your work to books@atmospherepress.com and let us know that you attended tonight's event. We look forward to hearing from you. And other than that, have a peaceful rest of your evening, everyone. Thank you.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure meeting all of you, seeing all of you, and listening to all of you.
Mhm.
Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night,
Night,
everybody.
everybody.